There was something comforting about these Saturday afternoons. No obligations, no pressing deadlines, just the rhythm of domestic stillness. Then my phone buzzed on the coffee table, shattering the fragile calm. Emily glanced up momentarily, a flicker of curiosity crossing her face before she returned to her book. I reached for the device, the name Brian illuminating the screen. My brother. It wasn't unusual for him to call, but something about it felt out of place. Brian wasn't the type to disrupt a weekend without a reason. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone light. His voice on the other end was animated, almost bubbling with excitement. "Tom, I've got some news. Ellie and I are throwing a party tomorrow to celebrate the new baby. You and Emily have to come. It's been ages since we all got together." I couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. Brian had always been the extroverted one, the heartbeat of our family gatherings. "Of course. That's great news. Count us in." As the call ended and I relayed the invitation to Emily, her reaction was immediate. Her eyes lit up, her book forgotten as she leaped from the couch. "A party? Finally," she exclaimed, her voice carrying an energy I hadn't heard in a long time. She was already halfway up the stairs before I could respond, mumbling something about checking the wardrobe. I could hear her muttering to herself, pulling dresses from their hangers and discarding them onto the bed. It was almost comical how animated she was. I settled back into the armchair, bemused by her sudden burst of activity. Emily used to adore social events, always the first to suggest gatherings with friends or family. But somewhere in the blur of our 4-year marriage, those moments had become rare. It wasn't intentional, just the natural erosion of time and routine. We hadn't been to a party in years. I watched her silhouette flicker past the upstairs window, her laughter floating down the stairs as she sorted through her options. She was already imagining the fun she'd have, and I couldn't help but smile at her renewed energy. Yet, a strange unease settled in my chest. It wasn't jealousy, nor was it dread. It was something subtler, quieter, a whisper of something I couldn't quite place. Brushing the thought aside, I resolved to focus on the moment. This was a chance for both of us to break free from the monotony. A party to reconnect, to remember what it felt like to be us before life became so ordinary. The room buzzed with an energy I hadn't seen in Emily for years. She darted back and forth between the closet and the bed, holding up dresses, discarding others, occasionally muttering to herself in a rhythm that almost seemed rehearsed. "Too formal. Too casual. God, did I ever wear this?" she murmured, her tone bouncing between excitement and frustration. She turned toward me, holding up a deep green dress. "What do you think, Tom? Too much?" I leaned back against the doorway, smiling. "Looks great," I said, though I barely looked. Emily always looked great, and she didn't need my input to make a decision. She'd try on every option twice anyway. As she vanished back into the closet, her voice trailing off into another round of self-commentary, I let my thoughts drift. Brian, what could we give him? A baby meant endless expenses, diapers, toys, a mountain of tiny, overpriced clothes they'd outgrow in a month. Maybe it would be best to just hand him some money. Let him and Ellie decide what they actually needed. My musings were interrupted by the sharp chime of Emily's phone. It rested on the bed where she tossed it earlier, vibrating as the screen lit up. She was already out of the closet by the time I noticed, and in one swift motion, she grabbed the phone and turned off the sound, slipping it into her pocket. "Everything okay?" I asked, not really thinking much of it. "Yeah," she said quickly. "Just spam, you know how it is." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes before she returned to the pile of dresses, her focus shifting so fast it was like the moment hadn't happened at all. I shrugged it off, though a small knot of curiosity tightened in my stomach. I chalked it up to nothing. Everyone's phone gets random calls these days. Robocalls. Probably harmless. And yet, as I watched her bury herself in her preparations, I couldn't help but feel that the moment lingered a second longer than it should have. Brushing the thought aside, I decided to take a shower and clear my head. The hot water pounded against my skin, drowning out the noise of Emily bustling in the bedroom. My mind wandered back to Brian's party, the thought of the familiar faces, the inevitable baby stories, and whether I should slip the cash into a card or just hand it to him outright. Then I heard it. At first, it was faint, muffled by the hiss of the shower. I paused, reaching out to turn the water off slightly. Emily's voice carried through the thin walls of our home, soft but urgent. She was whispering. I grabbed a towel, still dripping, and crept closer to the door. I didn't open it. Something told me to stay out of sight. Her words came clearer now, each one sharpening the edge of my curiosity. "I'm going to Brian's party tomorrow," she said, her tone low and deliberate. Then a pause. I could feel the weight of silence hanging in the air, tense and expectant. "Oh yeah, you're going to be there too. It's going to be cool. See you tomorrow at the party?" I froze. My mind whirred as I replayed her words. Who was she talking to? Her voice carried a note of casual familiarity, almost intimate. I couldn't place it, but it felt wrong. Wrapping the towel around myself, I leaned against the wall, staring at the tiles as the water droplets clung to my skin. My mind ran in circles. A friend? A coworker? Someone she knew through Brian and Ellie? It could have been anyone, but the way she whispered, the deliberate softness, gnawed at me. I stayed in the shower longer than I needed to, trying to shake the feeling. Rationalize it. It didn't mean anything, I told myself. Nothing at all. But no matter how hard I tried, the question followed me like a shadow. Who was she talking to? The bathroom mirror fogged over as I stepped out of the shower, wrapping the towel around my waist. The house was quiet again, save for the faint rustling of fabric from the bedroom where Emily was still lost in her world of party preparation. The whisper I had overheard replayed in my head, a nagging thread I couldn't seem to pull free. When I entered the room, she was seated at the vanity, smoothing her hair with long, deliberate strokes. She caught my reflection in the mirror and smiled, her mood seemingly untouched by anything else. "Did you talk to someone just now?" I asked casually, hoping my tone sounded offhand. I didn't want to spark defensiveness, just a hint of truth. She glanced at me, her expression perfectly neutral. "No, I was talking to myself," she said, her voice light, almost dismissive. I nodded, pretending to accept her answer as if I hadn't overheard a single word. "Well, if you're taking votes, I hope you gave yourself good advice," I teased, forcing a chuckle. Emily laughed, the sound natural and unbothered, and the knot in my stomach tightened. She was good at this. Too good, maybe? I told myself not to read into it as I crossed the room to the wardrobe. Inside, my suit hung waiting, sleek and freshly pressed. Pulling it on, I took a moment to adjust the cuffs and tie, watching my reflection as I smoothed out invisible creases. When I stepped out and stood next to Emily, who had changed into the emerald green dress she'd debated over earlier, I caught our reflection in the mirror. Together, we looked every bit the polished couple. The kind of image that made others believe everything was picture perfect. "You make me look beautiful," she said softly, stepping closer. I let out a laugh, light and easy. "Well, at least one of us gets the credit," I quipped, shaking off the doubt that had been simmering all evening. For a brief moment, I let myself enjoy the way she looked at me, her expression soft and warm, as if there was no place she'd rather be. The spell didn't last long. As we sat down to eat, Emily's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it quickly, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed a reply. My gaze lingered on her, watching the way her expression shifted, intense focus, then a fleeting smile. When she noticed me looking, she locked the phone and set it down screen side down, the motion swift and calculated. I raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay?" "Just work stuff," she said with a quick smile, brushing it off as if it were the most natural explanation in the world. I nodded, saying nothing, though the unease returned, sharper now. This wasn't the first time I'd seen her do this. The quick typing, the sudden end to a conversation when I noticed. It had become almost routine, like something she assumed I'd stopped noticing or caring about. I told myself it was probably nothing, that this was just a harmless quirk. I had convinced myself of that enough times before. But something about tonight felt different, heavier, like a storm cloud gathering on the edge of the horizon. When we finally climbed into bed, Emily seemed lighter, more excited. She stretched out beside me, her hands behind her head, her gaze fixed on the ceiling. "I'm going to party hard tomorrow," she said with a grin. "It's been ages since we went out like this." I didn't realize how much I've missed it. Her excitement was infectious. I found myself smiling despite the lingering doubts in the back of my mind. "I'll try to keep up," I said, feigning a groan. "But I'm warning you, I might not have the stamina for your kind of partying anymore." She laughed, nudging me with her elbow. "You'll be fine. Just don't embarrass me on the dance floor, okay?" We exchanged a few more jokes, light and playful, before the conversation tapered off into comfortable silence. As she drifted to sleep, her breathing soft and even, I stared at the ceiling, my mind refusing to settle. Tomorrow promised excitement, celebration, and family. But the whispers, the texts, and the way Emily had brushed everything off lingered in the corners of my thoughts, casting shadows over the anticipation. Somewhere deep inside, I felt it, the uneasy awareness that things were not quite what they seemed. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay in bed long after Emily's breathing had settled into the soft, rhythmic cadence of slumber. My mind replayed the small moments from the day, the whispered phone call, the sudden texting, the way she'd locked her phone when I looked her way. Each memory gnawed at the edges of my thoughts, like a splinter I couldn't remove. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I drifted into a restless sleep. But sleep brought no peace. Instead, it plunged me into a dream so vivid, so chilling, that it gripped me in its icy claws. I was at a party, though it didn't feel like Brian's. The room was unfamiliar, bright, chaotic, filled with faces I didn't recognize. The music was loud, the kind that rattled your bones and made conversation nearly impossible. I stood in the middle of the crowd, a bystander, watching as the scene unfolded. There was Emily, radiant in her emerald green dress, laughing with her head thrown back, the sound drowned out by the thumping bass. She wasn't alone. Standing next to her, his hand casually resting on the small of her back, was Adams, an old acquaintance, someone I hadn't seen in years. His smile was smug, confident, as if he belonged there beside her. I tried to move toward them, to call out, but my legs felt as if they were rooted to the floor. I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came. I was a statue, trapped in my own mind, powerless to do anything but watch. Emily turned to Adams, her eyes sparkling, and leaned closer. She began to dance, her movements slow and deliberate, the kind of dance meant for only one pair of eyes. Adams watched her with a possessive intensity, his grin widening as she swayed. And then it happened. She stepped closer, her face inches from his, and without hesitation, she kissed him. A deep, lingering kiss that made the room seem to blur and fade around them. My heart pounded in my chest, a deafening roar that drowned out the music. I tried again to move, to shout, to do anything, but I was frozen, a helpless spectator to my own nightmare. The dream ended abruptly, the image of their kiss seared into my mind as I jolted awake with a scream. My body was drenched in sweat, my heart racing as if I'd been running for miles. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. Emily sat bolt upright beside me, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear. "Tom, what's wrong?" she stammered, her voice trembling. I tried to catch my breath, the dream still clinging to me like a shadow. "But I don't know," I managed to say, though my voice felt foreign, shaky. "It was a nightmare. A bad one." She placed a hand on my arm, her touch hesitant, almost shaky. "You scared me," she whispered. "Do you want something to help you sleep? I think I have some tranquilizers left from when I couldn't sleep last month. They'll help." I nodded numbly, too shaken to argue. She handed me 3 small pills, her hands trembling slightly. "Take these," she said softly. "You'll feel better." I swallowed them down with a sip of water, the bitter taste lingering on my tongue. Within minutes, the fog of sleepiness returned, heavier this time, pulling me under like a tide. My last memory was of Emily's voice, faint and distant. "It's okay, Tom. Just rest." When I woke again, sunlight was streaming through the curtains. The clock on the nightstand read 10:04 a.m. I had slept deeply, dreamlessly, as if the tranquilizers had erased the night's horrors. My body felt heavy, my mind sluggish, But the nightmare was a distant memory, blurred around the edges. Emily's voice cut through the haze, pulling me back to the present. "Darling, aren't you getting up yet?" she asked, her tone light and cheerful. "We need to leave soon." I blinked up at her, still half-dazed. She stood by the bed, already dressed, her hair neatly styled and her makeup flawless. She looked like nothing had happened, like the nightmare and the pills and her shaken voice in the night had all been figments of my imagination. "Yeah," I murmured, sitting up slowly. "I'll get ready." She smiled, her lips curling in that effortless way that used to make me feel like the luckiest man alive. Now, it only deepened the unease that had begun to take root in my chest. The dream still clung to me, faint and shadowy, as I dragged myself out of bed. My body felt sluggish, my head foggy, but Emily seemed unaffected by my restless night. She stood in front of the vanity, a towel wrapped around her head as she carefully blow-dried her hair. The sound of the dryer hummed in the background, a steady rhythm that contrasted with the storm of thoughts still swirling in my mind. When she glanced over and saw me in the doorway, her brow furrowed. "Tom, you look terrible," she said, tilting her head. "Come here." I shuffled over, catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror. She wasn't wrong. My face was pale, my eyes sunken, the remnants of the nightmare etched into every line and shadow. I looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Emily set down the dryer and rummaged through her collection of beauty products. "Sit," she instructed, her tone brisk but kind. "You're not going to Brian's looking like a ghost. Let me fix you up." Before I could protest, she was applying some sort of mask to my face, her hands moving with practiced precision. It smelled faintly of mint and something herbal. "You'll thank me later," she said, smiling as she worked. Her touch was soft, her movements careful, and for a moment, I let myself relax. When she was finished, she handed me a mirror. My skin looked better, brighter, smoother, but the man staring back still felt like a stranger. "See," she said, satisfied. "Now, go put on your suit and try not to mess up my work." I laughed despite myself, shaking off the lingering unease as I headed to the wardrobe. The suit fit perfectly, every line tailored to precision. When I stepped out, Emily whistled appreciatively. "Now that's my husband," she said, giving me a playful wink. The drive to Brian's house felt lighter, the excitement of the day gradually replacing the weight of the morning. By the time we arrived, my spirits were high. Brian's place was alive with energy, laughter spilling out into the crisp air as we approached the front door. The scent of grilled food wafted from the backyard, mingling with the sound of chatter and clinking glasses. I burst through the door with Emily by my side, throwing my arms wide. "Who had a baby?" "Congratulations, brother," I shouted, my voice booming over the crowd. "This is going to be the best party of my life." Brian appeared from the kitchen, grinning ear to ear. He clapped me on the back, his joy infectious. "Tom, you made it," he said, his voice full of warmth. "And you brought the beautiful Emily, always the better half." "Better half, my foot," I quipped, raising the champagne flute that someone had pressed into my hand. "A toast to the new dad," I shouted, and the room erupted in cheers as I raised my glass high. The party was in full swing in no time. Emily and I danced, the music upbeat and infectious. The tension of the morning faded with each laugh, each toast. For the first time in what felt like forever, everything seemed perfect. And then Adams arrived. I hadn't seen Adams in months, and his sudden appearance jolted something inside me. A flicker of recognition, a shadow of the dream. But I shook it off, pushing the thought aside as he approached. "Adams," I called out, throwing my arms open. "You bastard, where've you been?" His smile was easy, his handshake firm. "Tom, good to see you. It's been too long." We caught up quickly, our conversation flowing effortlessly. Adams had always had that charm, the kind of presence that could make anyone feel at ease. For a moment, the dream was nothing but a distant memory, a figment of a restless night. As we talked, Emily floated by, her laughter ringing out as she mingled with the guests. Adams's eyes followed her briefly, but he said nothing, turning back to me with another joke that had us both laughing. After a while, we drifted apart, Adams moving to greet other friends while I made my way back to Emily. The night carried on, filled with music, drinks, and the buzz of celebration. For now, the tension was gone, replaced by the warmth of familiar faces and the joy of the occasion. But somewhere, beneath the laughter and the clinking glasses, a whisper of unease lingered, quiet and insistent, waiting for the moment it would rise again. Emily stood close to me, her hand brushing my arm as we chatted with Brian and a few other guests. Her laughter was light, her smile radiant, and for a while, it felt like we were the perfect couple again. But the moment was fleeting. After about 10 minutes, Emily leaned in, her lips close to my ear. "I'm going to grab a drink with Adams," she said, her tone casual. I nodded, distracted by Brian's story about the sleepless nights of parenthood. It didn't register at the time, her choice of company, the way her voice lingered on his name. If only I'd paid closer attention, maybe I would have realized what was happening. Maybe I could have stopped it. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed rooted in place, laughing at Brian's jokes as the minutes ticked by. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Emily at the bar with Adams, her posture relaxed, her laughter growing louder with each passing drink. She was drinking more than usual, much more. Emily had never been one for heavy drinking. A glass of wine or a single cocktail was her limit. But tonight, with Adams by her side, she threw caution to the wind. Shots lined the counter in front of them, and they toasted each other again and again, their faces flushed with alcohol and exhilaration. I should have gone over then, but I didn't. I convinced myself it was harmless. She was just letting loose, enjoying the party. And Adams, he was an old friend, wasn't he? What harm could there be in a few drinks? The sight of a familiar face pulled my attention away. It was one of my business partners, Michael, and with him stood two of our key investors. I hadn't expected to see them here. What were they doing at Brian's party? Surprised but pleased, I walked over to greet them, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. The conversation turned to work almost immediately, discussions of future projects and potential expansions consuming my thoughts. It was a rare opportunity to speak candidly with them in a relaxed setting, and I threw myself into the conversation. Time slipped away. A half hour passed, then 45 minutes, and finally a full hour. It wasn't until the music changed to a slower, mellower tune that I realized how much time had gone by. I glanced around, scanning the crowd for Emily. She wasn't there. Neither was Adams. A flicker of unease stirred in my chest as I looked toward the bar where they'd been earlier. It was empty now, the glasses cleared away, no sign of them. I checked the yard next, weaving through clusters of guests, my eyes searching for her emerald dress or the flash of Adams's familiar grin. But they weren't there either. I called out her name, but the music swallowed my voice. No one noticed my growing concern, too caught up in their own conversations and laughter. I approached a group near the patio. "Have you seen Emily?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. One of them, a woman I vaguely recognized as Brian's coworker, nodded toward the house. "I think I saw her and Adams heading up to the attic," she said, her voice casual. "The attic?" My chest tightened. Why the attic? What could possibly take them there? It was a cramped, dusty space, barely used, hardly fitting for conversation or drinks. "Thanks," I said, my voice tight, forcing a smile I didn't feel. I turned toward the house, my feet carrying me with a strange, unsteady urgency. The voices around me faded into the background, replaced by the pounding of my own heart. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. As I approached the stairs, the music seemed distant, muffled by the walls. The laughter and chatter from below were muted now, leaving only the creak of the wooden steps beneath my feet. I hesitated at the base of the attic ladder, my hand hovering over the rail. What was I about to find? The attic ladder creaked beneath my weight, every step an echo of the dread building inside me. The faint murmur of voices reached my ears, muffled but unmistakable. I paused midway up, my hand gripping the rail as I strained to make out the words. "I don't know if I really want to do this," came Emily's voice, soft but clear. "I love my husband more than you, but I think once we can try it with you. But let's be careful, because I don't like it to hurt." My breath caught in my throat. The words hung in the air, their meaning twisting in my mind. What was she saying? What were they doing? My pulse pounded in my ears as I climbed the last few rungs, desperate to understand. When I reached the top, the dim light filtering through the attic's small window revealed a scene that sent my world crashing down around me. I can't describe in detail everything I saw there, because YouTube doesn't allow me to say that. Emily was there, lying on the old dusty blanket we'd stored years ago, her dress discarded in a crumpled heap on the floor. She wasn't alone. Standing over her was Adams. He leaned toward her, his intentions glaringly clear, her own words still ringing in my head like a cruel refrain. I froze, my body locked in place as if the horror of the moment had turned me to stone. For a fleeting second, I told myself I wasn't seeing it right, that there had to be some other explanation. But there wasn't. Something inside me snapped. I stormed forward, the sound of my own voice surprising me as I shouted, "What the hell is going on here?" Adams turned toward me, his expression slow and hazy, a stupid grin plastered across his face. He didn't even have the sense to look ashamed. Emily scrambled to sit up, clutching the blanket to her chest, her wide eyes filled with something between panic and confusion. "Wait, this isn't? Don't even try it." I roared, my voice cracking with fury. "Don't you dare say it's not what it looks like." I turned to Adams, my fists clenching at my sides. Before I could stop myself, I lunged at him, shoving him back against the slanted wall of the attic. The wooden frame rattled with the force, and he stumbled, too drunk to catch himself properly. "You bastard," I hissed, my fist connecting with his jaw in one clean strike. "Tom, stop it!" Emily screamed, her voice shrill and frantic. She crawled toward me, clutching the blanket tighter. "We didn't do anything. It wasn't what you think." "Not what I think?" I turned to her, the anger and betrayal bubbling over. "Do you even hear yourself?" Before she could respond, the commotion drew others to the attic. The trapdoor burst open, and voices filled the space as people climbed the ladder. Brian was the first to appear, his face red with anger and confusion. "What the hell is going on up here?" he demanded, his voice booming over the chaos. His eyes darted between me, Emily, and Adams, taking in the disheveled clothes, the accusations hanging thick in the air. "Why is Emily? Why is she not dressed? What is this? She cheated on me," I shouted, my voice cracking as I pointed to Adams. "With him? Right here, in your attic?" Brian's face darkened. He turned to Adams, who was slumped against the wall, still too drunk to stand properly. Without hesitation, Brian grabbed him by the lapels of his suit and hauled him to his feet. "Get the hell out of my house," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "No." Adams mumbled something incoherent, but Brian wasn't interested in hearing it. He dragged him to the ladder and shoved him downward, the thud of his landing echoing through the house. The guests below gasped as Adams stumbled into view, disheveled and bleeding. I couldn't stay there. The weight of the humiliation, the judgmental stares from the other guests, Emily's frantic denials, it was all too much. My chest felt like it was collapsing under the pressure, and the air in the attic was suffocating. I turned and bolted, ignoring Emily's voice calling after me. "Tom, wait. Please, let me explain." There was nothing left to explain. Nothing I wanted to hear. I pushed through the crowd downstairs, the music now jarring and cruel in its cheerfulness. Faces turned toward me, their expressions a mix of pity and disapproval. I heard whispers as I passed, venomous and sharp, cutting through what little composure I had left. "He lost control. God, what a scene. What a mess." By the time I reached the front door, my vision was blurred with tears. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran, away from the party, away from the betrayal, away from the life that had unraveled in front of everyone. I stumbled to the car, my breath ragged and uneven as if I'd just run a marathon. My hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel, the events of the night playing in a cruel loop in my mind. Emily's words, her betrayal, Adams's smug, drunken face. It was too much. I slammed my fists into the wheel, the horn blaring into the night. "Why?" I screamed, the word raw and guttural, clawing its way from my chest. Why would she do this to me? My vision blurred with tears as I pulled onto the empty road. The engine roared beneath me, but I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away, to outrun the crushing weight of what I'd seen. Each mile felt heavier than the last, my mind a storm of disbelief and rage. I screamed until my throat burned, punched the wheel until my knuckles throbbed, shouted at the night like it owed me answers. But no answers came. When I finally reached home, the silence was deafening. The house, our house, stood there like a monument to a life I no longer recognized. My stomach churned as I stepped inside, the familiar smell of her perfume lingering in the air, mocking me. The first thing I saw was the photo of us on the mantelpiece. It was from our wedding day, Emily in her white dress, her eyes sparkling with joy. I couldn't bear it. With a roar of frustration, I grabbed the frame and hurled it across the room. The glass shattered, the sound ringing out like a scream. I lost control. One by one, I tore through the house, throwing everything that reminded me of her. Vases smashed against the walls, pillows ripped from the couch, drawers yanked open and emptied onto the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I trashed the home we had built together, each broken object a futile attempt to erase the memories. When there was nothing left to destroy, I stumbled to the bedroom. I grabbed my suitcase, throwing my clothes inside without care. One bag turned into two, then three, as I packed everything I could call mine. By the time I was done, the car was stuffed, my anger still bubbling beneath the surface. Before I left, I grabbed my keys and walked over to her car. The sleek black sedan gleamed under the porch light, every inch of it perfect and polished. I couldn't stand it. Taking the key, I dragged it along the side, the sharp metal screeching as it carved a jagged line into the paint. It wasn't enough, but it would have to do. The road stretched out before me, dark and endless. The phone buzzed in the passenger seat, Brian's name flashing on the screen. I ignored it at first, gripping the wheel tighter as I drove faster. But it buzzed again and again until I finally gave in. "What?" I snapped, my voice hoarse from yelling. "Tom," Brian's voice was quiet, heavy with guilt. "I'm so sorry. I never should have invited Adams." "This isn't your fault," I interrupted. My voice cracked, my anger giving way to exhaustion. "It's hers. It's all hers." "Where are you going?" he asked, concern bleeding through the line. "To Grandpa's house," I said flatly. "The one in the village. Don't tell her where I am. I don't want to see her. I don't want her to know." Brian hesitated. "She's still at the party in the attic. She's been crying." "I don't care," I cut him off, my grip tightening on the phone. "I don't care what she does." I hung up before he could respond, tossing the phone onto the seat. It buzzed again moments later, Emily's name flashing across the screen this time. I blocked her without hesitation, the thought of hearing her voice too much to bear. When I finally reached Grandpa's house, the sun was beginning to rise. The old building loomed before me, its paint peeling and its windows dusty with age. It was cold and uninviting, but it felt right. The place as broken as I was. I didn't bother unpacking. I dropped my bags by the door, collapsed onto the sagging couch, and fell into a restless sleep. The days blurred into weeks, each one a haze of alcohol and regret. Bottles piled up in the corners of the house, the only company I allowed myself. I didn't shower, didn't clean, didn't care. The world outside the cracked windows might as well not have existed. Then one day Brian came. He didn't knock. He just walked in, his face set with determination. "This isn't you, Tom," he said, looking around the wreck of the living room. "You can't keep living like this." "Leave me alone," I muttered, reaching for another bottle. He didn't. He grabbed the bottle from my hand, dumping it out onto the floor. "Enough," he said firmly. "Emily's gone. She moved to her mom's weeks ago. The house is empty. Go back. Start over." I wanted to argue, to tell him to mind his own business. But his words hit something inside me, something buried beneath the layers of pain and anger. I looked around at the ruin I'd made of myself, the man I barely recognized anymore. Brian was right. I couldn't keep living like this. It wasn't easy, but I returned to the house. The silence was deafening, but it was also a clean slate. Emily was gone, And with her, the shadows that had haunted every corner. I started small, cleaning the mess I'd left behind, piece by piece. Each day felt like a new beginning, the weight of the past slowly lifting. I wasn't whole, but I was moving forward. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe again.